All right, I think we're good for today. All right, so I think I'm set up and ready to go here. So I think we'll just get started. This is an off day for me streaming in terms of like I don't usually stream on this day, so don't know if anyone's gonna show up to hang out, but we'll see. That said, the goal today is actually Blender add-on scripting, which is actually something that I don't have a lot of experience in. So I've got a couple of things here. Did a little bit of pre-work yesterday to make sure that I could actually do something on the stream. I've got this project set up. It's got a test project inside of it that's this random Bevy project. The random Bevy project is using main and is loading in a GLTF file. The interesting part is it's enabling Bevy remote. And we're using main because Bevy remote on main has a new endpoint. That new endpoint dumps out. Oh, I can just run this actually. No, I can't because I didn't run the app. So if you run the app, right, and your game is running here, the Bevy remote protocol allows you to send requests. Right, that file already exists, and new shell warns me about it. So if I run this, which is a post request to basically localhost at a specific port with a JSON RPC of 2, a method, some params. I could send a request ID in here. I didn't. That request ID would come back here to identify to make sure that it's the same request. JSON RPC 2, and then this result, which is just gigantic. Well, not really gigantic, but like 572 fields is a lot in this case. So if you start looking at kind of what's in here, we see a lot of like components and other types. This is the entire type registry for Bevy that you can now access via effectively an HTTP endpoint that you can load into your Bevy app. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here. See if I can do where name is I forget what I named this power level. Forget what the operator is for this. Anyway, I already have this written out to a file, so it doesn't matter. So if we look at that registry JSON, right, I can kill the app right now. And I go down to power level. This will be test project : power level, which I think I should be able to find over here, but I guess I'm doing something slightly wrong with my request. Oh well. Actually, you know what? I don't know if that column name is titled that, but anyway. So we've got this power level component inside of a project called test project. Test project is like the name of this project specifically. Create name test project doesn't have any items. It's a tuple struct. So we get a lot of like reflection data about this. This reflection data includes the fact that it has component reflection data, short name, type path, all that kind of stuff. So that is this specifically. We derive component, we reflect that component data. We have serialize on both deserialize and serialize sides. And this is just a power level struct, which is a component that contains an F32. Now we aren't using that anywhere. We don't actually need to use it anywhere. The rest of this example is actually just dumping out all the GLTF extras, which is where the Blender stuff comes in. So the goal today is going to get this data into a Blender add-on, build some UI in a panel, which that's the other project I have over here. If I can move the Blender UI a little bit. So this panel right here is a custom panel that I created. So if we switch to like the light or the camera or what I'm calling not cube or whatever, this is a panel that pulls in or will pull in some of the data from that object ID. And we're going to store that component data instantiated as custom properties on this object. The idea being that then we would normally be able to export again. We would get this GLB file once again, and this example will then, currently it's not dumping out any GLTF extras because we don't have any. But if I went in here and I went down to custom properties specifically, and I added a new one, this one's just going to be like prop 100, I guess, because that's what it happens to be. We'll go to test project, assets, export. Actually, I think I didn't export with the custom properties. I do need to do that. Include custom properties, export. So now if we run over here, we do see that not cube has GLTF extras for prop 1.0. And our goal is to get some of our data in there from this add-on. Obviously, we can set custom properties however we want, and that just works. But yeah, we'll see. And then the idea is that we want to take the sort of stringified component data that ends up in this custom property and reflect that back into actual components on actual entities. So it's actually kind of a lot. Hey, Vic, how's it going? Good morning. Just kind of going over the overview over here. Yeah, so we've got BRP enabled in this Bevy project. That's the remote plugin and the remote HTTP plugin. That has a type registry URL that gives us this JSON output. We can get our reflected component data here. We want to get this into the Blender add-on that we've got going on right here, ideally showing up in this custom panel that I've built for this object specifically. We want to be able to select a component, write that out into the custom properties, export that to GLTF extras, and then get that back into Bevy overall. So, yeah. There's a couple of things that I think are good first steps. Hi, for info, you can use the Blender add-on to custom properties to the Blender stuff and have those properties exported for free by the GLTF export plugin. Yes, that's my plan. My plan is to use the data manipulation Python API to store information in the custom properties serialized into a single custom property, really. The panel should be showing that custom property in its sort of like deserialized, hey, you've selected these things and instantiated them form. And then when you regularly do a GLTF export, that custom property data comes with it. And then we have an observer when you spawn the scene that will go through and actually instantiate all of that data via reflection. That's the goal. Or your plugin can contain a plugin for the GLTF export plugin and export what you want without passing by Blender custom properties. I don't know how I would store the data if I wasn't storing it on the object. But I will say that currently I don't know what the data structure is going to look like. Obviously we've got JSON output here for the definition of the components. So we probably do JSON output back or something like that. But that is something that I need to solve before I choose how to store and export the data. The current plan is definitely one of those two options, where we are storing it either in custom properties or in something that will convert to a custom property when we export. I know custom properties only have primitive values, I believe. Although in the UI, they have actual Python data types, so I'm not really sure about that. But the documentation says it only does primitive value types. Let's see, Blender add-on. See if I can find the developer documentation. I didn't enable developer extras. Hey Ryan, good morning. How's it going? Ooh, editors. Navigations, color pickers. Color pickers is cool. Header position. One of the things that's really awkward about the Blender documentation is it says things and then doesn't show them. Like, if I remember correctly, maybe it is here. I find navigating the Blender docs to be particularly, here we go. So it's got a list of like panel, menu, operator, property group, keying set, render engine, right? But if you click on panel, there are no like photos of where a panel can go or anything like that. Like it's like, oh, there's a draw header function. Like, okay, that's I guess the header of the panel that I'm working on, or I do have some things enabled too. In preferences, you can enable Python tooltips here. Python tooltips is really nice because you can just hover over any of these menus and it shows you what the Python like ID is for it. That's how I got this fetch Bevy type registry function into the menu here, which runs and doesn't really do anything at the moment. It is a little tough to have all of this on screen at the same time. So maybe I open up another desktop. It's also tough to do it without looking at Blender, so we'll see. I've given the project kind of just a temporary name, so we're just going with Skeen for the moment. I've got an operator here, so that's one class. This is the thing that gets called via the edit menu. Basically, class with execute, return the finished enum. And then we've got a custom panel. I showed that a little bit earlier. That's this custom panel right here. Which I guess if I'm showing this all on the same page, I can make this a little bigger. So that's this panel right here. So this button can call an operator. This name is just like a property that is, I guess, directly automatically linked via this prop function. It's kind of hard to get to like the documentation for that row layout. right? Like they show .row here kind of all over the place, but not much like in terms of where to find the API data for that. Yeah, so .row, I guess, is what I really want. Row. I guess that's a UI layout. So row, align, heading, context, translate, sub layout. For panel placement, the doc for BL space type and BL region type properties linked to the possible values. I am using space and layout type at the moment. Asset shelf, header, panel. Space type items. Yeah, so this is like a little bit awkward because it's like, okay, cool, 3D viewport. Where does it show up if I specify this in the 3D viewport? It's like I have to go and do it and then run it and then like go look at the 3D viewport, which I assume is like this panel here, but I don't know that. And they so easily could have just like said that. Same thing for all of these other ones. I think we're using properties right now. Maybe. I think we're using properties right now. Yeah, space type properties, region type window. Where it is in the space type depends on the value of region type. The space type depends on the value of region type. Yeah, I guess I really don't know. I like it doesn't how do I say this? It doesn't help me to figure out where it will actually go. I still, based on this documentation, like, yeah, okay, UI sidebar. Where the hell is the UI sidebar in the Blender UI? I don't know. And even then, like, going into the space type, so it's like UI sidebar graph editor. So the sidebar of the UI in the graph editor or something like that. Like, it doesn't help me identify where that's actually going to show up. So I wish there was a little bit, like, I wish the documentation was a little bit more descriptive in that sense. But I am fine with it where it is now. Like, I've gotten to a point where I found window properties, right? And window properties puts it here in the object properties. And I think that that is a just fine place for it at the moment. We can always move it around later, I think. And my understanding is that this only has object context, so it doesn't have like material, which can also have a GLTF extras. So we will at some point, after we get this to work, want to expand it to other places that it could be. But object is fine for now. Current object is fine. I've gotten it to call a random like primitive cube add. I think that if I called this, it would call like the fetch type registry stuff. I am doing, this is the other thing. Everything's on the right-hand side that I want to click. There we go. So now this says fetch Bevy type registry. And if I click that, it runs the fetch type registry stuff, which is cool. So like we can set up buttons and things. Yes, it's a bit cumbersome, and you think the graph space types do not have sidebars, so it can get a bit weird. Also, strings and not enums. Yeah, they're like single quote strings, which I guess are enums technically because that's how they do enums. I don't know. It is what it is. I'm not a super knowledgeable Python person. I've just written a couple of languages and stuff, so uh like I understand what a class is, but if you asked me to do this from scratch without looking at anything, I would have been like, nope. Okay, so the important things. We can get the type information from Bevy, and we can do that via BRP or the Bevy Remote Protocol, which as of main, right, 0.16, has a new URL for requesting that information. That tends to be a lot of information. You can see we're on line like 20,386. So it's like all of the reflection data for all of the types. And there's one or two things that I kind of don't know how to deal with yet. Like this power level contains an F32. But its type is array, which is a little weird. It is a tuple struct, but I don't have all of the information on kind of how that's supposed to be set up either. So like the other thing is at some point I'll want to play around with this. And like this could eventually be like 2 F32s or something, right? So then we cargo run. Let me delete this. Fetch the types, get the registry, look for power level. And then power level has this different type, which is just like a tuple of 2 F32s. So this string, TBD, I don't know. But this is still an array. So we kind of have to build the UI out of the information we have here. Are y'all having heavy thunderstorms recently? So one of the things we do have to figure out oh, we get a value here. Okay. So this is going to be JSON value, I guess. Interesting. Validation succeeds if each element of the instance validates against the schema at the same position. If any, this keyword does not constrain the length of the array. If the array is longer than the keyword's value, the keyword validates only the prefix of matching length. Okay, so if we get it wrong and we're too long, then this will just kind of like work anyway, as long as the types match up. And this is JSON schema Bevy type. So the other thing that we need to do is figure out actually, there's an example for reflection. And I think before we do any more Blender stuff, one thing that I do want to do is figure out, oh, look who it is on the most recent commit. Showing up in chat and on the repo. Let's see. Reflection is in here somewhere. So it's reflection types, type data. So reflection is like a deep piece of Bevy. I haven't tried to instantiate all that much from raw type information. I think that this example has what we would need to do, but there might also be an easier way to batch it. 7 mentions on This Week in Bevy. 1 showcase, 6 issues. Nice. Yeah, I've been seeing you around a lot lately, both in Discord and in PRs and stuff. So one of the reasons that I want to do an observer to start out with isn't because I necessarily think the observer is the best way to do this, but it is one way to, if we add observer here, and this will be post-process scene, I guess is what we'll call it for now. But it gives us access to the type registry very trivially. Which means that we will also probably need the children. And this also does GLTF extras stuff at some point. So it'll be this. Scene instance ready needs to be imported. Interesting. Okay, so we end up with some scene getting spawned. It'll hit this. For child in what children dot iter descendants is what we're still calling it in main. Yeah. Trigger dot, and then what do we call it on the observer? Target? It's no longer entity, and I feel like entity was really obvious. Caller is debug information, so we're not going to go with that. I think we're going to go with target. So in this case, if we run this, this should just dump out all of the IDs of all the children, which in this case is like 3 items, which is exactly what we're looking for. If we wanted to, we could do a commands here. Trigger.target log components for each of these. Oh, not trigger target, sorry. We want child here. I guess entity is the better way to do that, but so that ends up giving us fairly noisy output, but we've got scene extras here, so that's the root scene. This is probably the cube. No, this is the cube. Not sure what this is. Maybe, I think we have a light in the scene that I exported, actually, now that I think about it. So light, cube, and overall scene. The PR is the most, other than your refactor, Bevy, GLTF, all the refactor made it in? That's good. Last time I looked at the refactor, it wasn't, oh, okay. Yeah, it's not merged yet. Is it in the merged queue is what you're saying? PR is the most recent on main, was merged within 10 minutes of it being open. Okay, so it was like documentation or something. I think I saw it was like links in the GLTF docs. Cool, yeah. So this, that. So this is GLTF material name. GLTF extras should be in here. Scene extras. GLTF extras. And I think this, I don't know what that is. So let's do GLTF extras dot get. I'm going to start calling these entity instead of child. We'll continue. Oh, actually main gives us the ability to return, but I think we want to continue here anyway. So this should give us 2 options, I think, maybe 1. Extras per entity, not cube, primitive extras, that's on the mesh. And we've got scene primitive extras. That doesn't sound right. I guess primitive and mesh are different in GLTF terms. That always confuses me. Git, using Git. We are on main for this. We're on main specifically because the BRP endpoint that I want to use is only available on main. Yeah, entity to target is confusing too. I saw the PR go in and I remembered that it changed. And I know that we've been using entity in the game on the weekend and other places. But definitely flip-flopping between them makes it even more confusing. Yeah, so since we're doing this, I'll show this. I don't show this on stream, or I don't show this in videos at all. But the way that you would see this is on devdocs.bevyengine.org. If you are working with main, this is something that you can use. I intentionally don't show this because I don't want people to think that it's like the release docs. So I just leave it out of all videos and stuff like that. The only docs I ever show are the whatever it's called, the regular docs, like the ones people should be going to. So observer trigger target is now what it is. But yeah, we'll probably reference this site more this stream than we ever have before. The big thing that I want to do right now, so we're post-processing the scene, right, and etc. And yeah, that says value prop equals 1. That's not what we want. I don't think this is what we want either. One of the kind of awkward parts is going to be that we're we're going to have to take the individual pieces of the data that we serialize through and then like fit it into components and then try to make it a thing. So we need to figure out the way to do that. If I remember correctly, this example is a little unfortunate because it keeps using this like value type, which is like a typed value. And then like it applies a patch and fine, whatever. Reads the type registry, serializes with the type registry to a string. So this should be a Ron string then. So theoretically, let's do this after, I guess. We're just going to hard code some stuff and make sure that we can actually get this to do the thing. I don't think we want to use Ron because I don't think that we're going to be able to use Ron in Python. I think we need JSON, but I also don't think they show Serialization in here. They pull in Ron from where? Where does Ron come from? Is it just in Prelude? Oh no, that the crate is Ron. It must be. Okay. So they pull that in from the Ron crate, qualified. Ron DE deserializer. It's a little awkward having not looked at the types. I assume we need JSON here. Let's just dump Ron into the project for the moment so that I'm not futzing around with things that aren't going to work. And then value here is let value equals, what is this? Power level 4. Oh, I made it 2. Okay, let's do the single again. I should probably just do marker components first, honestly. But I know we're going to run into this like immediately after marker components. So we end up with this. And this is the path to the component, like the fully qualified path as far as I can tell. And then the Ron, like rusty version of the value. So for a tuple, that will look like a tuple. I assume for a struct, it would look like a struct or like a regular object. Right, so if this is name, which it's absolutely not, and we run this, we should get something that looks still a little bit like a tuple. So I don't know. Ron is pretty popular in general. I feel like if we do Ron, we will have to like recreate a Ron serializer in Python, and that doesn't sound like fun. I feel like structuring JSON from Python is going to be way more way more of a fun project, I guess. Okay, so let's finish the example here. So deserializer, deserialize. Oh, it doesn't like that for some reason. Why doesn't it like that? Is that because I didn't copy and paste the usage of it a little bit later? Is that being inferred somehow? It's a trait not in scope. Why would that work on main and not where we have it? Is there an import? Let's see. Deserializer, serializer. Deserializer, serializer, struct. Partial reflect and deserialized seed. I don't know what deserialized seed is. It's also possible this error down here is just Rust Analyzer. Panicked. Oh, panicked because of the assertion. That's fine, I think. Yeah, so we get test project power level with the name, so we actually have the component entirely. So theoretically, this is the whole string. Let's get rid of the serializer here. And let's say the value equals this. Do this as a raw string so that we don't really have to change anything. And hopefully, I guess raw string should be what we do here. And then this should work. So if we can stick that theoretically in a custom property, then we can serialize the components. Tuesday stream, Trevor, Tuesday streams. I was asked to do the Blender stuff on stream. And I wasn't going to do it on a Saturday stream, I don't think. So I decided to add another stream this week. Right now, what we're doing is taking a look at what it looks or what it needs to look like to be able to go from string of values with component names to actual instantiated component. The purpose of which is to be able to specify things inside of Blender and not have to keep writing custom properties manually. Also doing this for myself as part of more of a investigation. So Bevy, their maintainer, has some life stuff going on right now. So in the meantime, I feel like it's useful for me to dig into kind of what that functionality is from the beginning, so that I understand why choices were made. I understand more about how everything works on the lower level. so that if I ever want to make more PRs to Blenby and whatnot, then I can do a little bit more of that. So we're doing like a very cut down version of Blenby where since we're on main, we're going to do BRP request to Bevy. That gives us all the type registry information here. This information then we're going to pull in the Blender. We have a Blender add-on started here that displays this panel. This panel will let us select from those components, insert some data. That'll get serialized into custom properties, exported when you export a GLTF. And then we're just going to do an observer on the scene instance ready, which is what we're doing right now. And grab the strings out of those custom properties and instantiate them on the entities that they need to be instantiated. Doing all that in a generic way. You suppose otherwise you do not need the info from the type registry, but the Blender add-on will be hard-coded for some components. I think yes, if we were going to do, we could hard-code components in the Blender add-on and also hard-code components in the Bevy code. If we did hard-code it in both locations, then we wouldn't need to do any serialization in that respect. Because the UI would be hard-coded, the value inputs would be hard-coded, whatever. The problem with that is how ridiculously big this file is. This is a 20,000 long or 20,000 line file. If we open registry, what is it, count, length, can never remember. I think the issue is that it's an objects. Yeah, so there's 572 types registered in this type registry. Obviously, if we hard-coded it, we would only need some subset of that. But the idea of even doing like 20 or 30 of these, which seems reasonable judging by the game that we're building on Saturday, right? That seems like more than I want to do in that sense. So doing it generically feels like the right way to go. I do think that, so we have it working with Ron. I do think we need to figure out how to get this to work in JSON. Because again, Python, I don't think has any kind of Ron serialization. Ron support in other languages. This is the same problem that like, well, I won't name anything specifically, but like language specific formats tend to have the problem of not being able to be used from other formats. Or from other languages, sorry. Brain in two places at once. So we basically need this code again. Let me comment all this out again. Get rid of this. Need this code to happen for this value. For a JSON version of it. So I think we need Saturday JSON here. We have Serialization. Serialization JSON doesn't have the flags. I don't know if Serialization JSON has this or if it's just toString on it. All right, this doesn't need to be that. We don't really need this to be toString pretty. I guess they match, which is interesting. So if they match, then maybe Serialization JSON also has this import. That feels weird. Another piece of info, depends on your OS or Linux distro, but most of the time Blender comes with its own Python, so installing dependencies for add-ons can be a bit complicated. Yeah, I can see that. I think if we do too much processing, like if it came to it that we needed to use Ron, for example, I think what I would actually do is embed Rust in Python and then use Python as like a interface with Blender and do all our logic in Rust. And then just pass strings back and forth over that barrier. And then we would be able to actually do Ron serialization and stuff like that. And then anything else we needed to do as well. And then if we wanted to, we could like embed some random Bevy crate if we wanted to do something special or whatnot. What is the issue here? This is not Ron string anymore, but takes one arguments, two were supplied. Okay. So hopefully we just get a JSON string here. Yeah, so power level name 4. I feel like that's much more reasonable from a Python perspective. I know it's only a brace change in this case, right? We basically changed from parentheses to curly brackets. But that feels like it's going to be easier to do because this is just JSON. So let's run this. We're going to need a couple of examples. One of the other things that I wrote down in this repo is doing this is going to require, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Doing this is going to require integration tests. Yeah, so properties, name, type. And the other thing is that there are two other ways that type registries can change over time, right? One of them is you add or remove components. That's kind of like, okay, now components are your API. So if you do backwards incompatible changes with components, then that is your choice as a developer. It would be nice if the extension could help you manage that, because if you're thinking about like 20 levels or even just like 5 levels, right? And you change, I don't know, the platform enum or something, and now you need to go touch everything that is a platform in every one of those levels. That sounds really painful. And then the other thing is Bevy from version to version. So like 15 to 16. Will change the location of different types. So doing this kind of serialization, I believe, not for like our project, because our project is just going to be like test project power level or something like that, right? I wrote it down somewhere here, I think. But there have been recent examples of, yeah, so like parent to child of, right? If you were using parent for some reason, or now that relationships are generic, if you were using some other version of a relationship and you had that inside of Blender and that changes from parent to child of, now everywhere you used parent, you have to change to child of. So the component names change, but also the paths change. Like if something was in Bevy, I guess it was Bevy utils, everything was getting moved out of Bevy utils recently. Or Bevy misc, I forget what it was called. So like the path, the fully qualified type path here, those paths can change even though the name of the component doesn't. And because we're dealing with those full paths, any full path change is considered a breaking change from the Blender usage perspective, which then means that you kind of have to have a way of discovering all of that and also fixing all of that. So that's secondary to what we're doing currently, but those kinds of things are very important if this project is going to live for any amount of time. Being able to integration test a bunch of different kinds of components to make sure that they all don't break from version to version. Most of the types will come from any given version, so that should be fine as long as the reflection format doesn't change. But I could see a world in which, like, I don't know, not properties.name, but like, what if this changed from module path to, I don't know, full module path or something, you know? Then we have to start knowing which Bevy version you're trying to use and then do access to paths based on that. And over a large amount of small changes, that could get very hairy. So maintainability is a real challenge, I think, with a project like this. But yeah, feeling good now that we have the ability to go from like stringified representation of component to other stuff. I wonder if so I'm pretty sure we're going to use Serde and not Ron. So I'm just going to keep it up with the Serde. Let's rename this from Ron string to JSON string. Get rid of this. Does that just always succeed? That's weird. There's no way, right? So another question I have is how many of these can deserialize at the same time? Like, do we have to do component by component or can we batch deserialize? So for example, if we get rid of, if we do this, for example, this is now a tuple of two components, right? And that is not registered. Even though it is somewhat representable. I wonder No registration for VEC. I don't think we can do multiple of these at a time like this. So we are going to need to do them individually, I think. What function are we using here? We're using reflect deserializer. Deserializer expects a map with a single entry where the key is the full type path. So if that's the case, then let's take this JSON string, right? That's the deserializer that expects a single entry, right? So can we do a vec of multiple JSON strings here? I guess no, because this needs to be from stir. What else do we have here? From reader, from slice, into iter. Okay, I think we need to do them one by one. Deserializer returns box line reflect. And then the only other question really is, once we have this reflect value, right? Which should work since I fixed the code. Is we technically have this, so we should be able to sit this here and do commands.entity . So this is the other thing that we need to figure out how to do. Because the reflect value isn't insertable. And it's not clear to me how that's expected to go. Register value. Type information. We need to be able to insert this. Reflect component. Let's check out the information for reflect component. Because the only things that we can show in the UI anyway are reflect component reflection data. There is no. Don't worry, there is no 0.16 release. I don't know if you're joking, but just there is no 0.16 release. We are working off the main branch. This is main branch Bevy today. Reflect component for type T can be obtained via data. We don't have yes, we are main branch Bevy. We are not on a release. We are working off of development work. .16 is probably not going to release for another 2 months. So should have put like a disclaimer at the beginning of the stream for anybody else that watches the video. Warning, do not do this. We're working with 0.16 because it has the Bevy remote protocol URL that I wanted to use for getting the type registry data. So what do we actually have here then? We've got a Box-Dyn partial reflect. Super trader reflect, which means anything that implements reflect, implements partial reflect. Reflect owned, clone value. Apply patch is dynamic. The other thing I'm concerned about is there was a lot of construction happening outside of my apartment yesterday morning. So it may turn out that they start using a jackhammer outside my window. At which point that will be it. Okay, so question currently is how do we insert reflected component data? Okay, reflect component, insert entity component. Okay. We need to use reflect component, insert entity component registry. So it's reflect component, insert. Oh, that takes self, actually. Okay. Self. So we still need to actually get the reflect component. We don't have the type T. because this will be potentially anything, right? For dynamic version of this method, data by ID, okay, data by ID returns a reference to the value with the given type ID. So data by ID, type ID, and hopefully partial reflect has some of that information for us. Is it reflect partial? Are we not even in the Bevy docs? Reflect partial. Reflect into partial reflect as partial reflect. Returns the type info. Type info sounds like it'll have something for us. Type ID. Eventually we will get a type ID. We get a different one for every single. Hopefully there's got type ID. Okay, cool. So reflect value dot get represented type info, right? And that gives us option type info. So let's say let type info else continue. And let's do like a warn here. Couldn't find type info for, and then we just like dump the reflect value maybe. And then if we have the type info, we should be able to get the type ID. And then from type ID, should be do type registration dot data by ID, right? App type registry. Where's type registration? Clone type data, downcast. While type data is often generated, yada yada, influence clone. And then let's do a GitHub search for a second. Reflect component. From C results. After adding the component to the type registry, it's a reflect component that can be retrieved when needed. How do we retrieve that? We have the app type registry, which stores the type registry. We're doing read currently. Type ID of, so we have our type ID. So type registry get should give us that information. This is an option type registration. So we'll continue, warn. I don't care about the message at the moment. What's the problem with reflect value? Used after move. Classic. Okay, so we're all the way down here now. And we have info. Which gives us a whole bunch of stuff. That gives us the power level stuff. And what did we actually need out of all of this? I am starting to forget. Data by ID, right? I guess .data is fine because we already have it. Maybe not. Type registry get, read, type path. Just need the insert. Type data, type registration, reflect component. A reflect component can be obtained via Bevy reflect type registration data. We need to do the dynamic version. What is a good GPU for Blender for $1,200? I don't think I have the answer for you. I am not up on my knowledge of GPUs, unfortunately. Okay, so we need a reflect component. We are told that we can get that via the type registration data. Is reflect identifiable a real thing, or is it a custom component here? I think it's a real thing. Do I do competitive programming on chef code? I don't even know what chef code is. I definitely don't do competitive programming, if that's what you're looking for. So maybe info.data.reflect component will just work. I'm being exceedingly verbose about these warnings because there are so many kind of individual places that I don't quite fully understand yet. So we have RC here, and we need to do rc.insert entity component is reflect value. And then type registry, I think. TBD. I think we need the world here. What programming languages do I know and what is my level? I guess I would say that I'm a multi-decade programmer. I know or have known a bunch of languages, but mostly I use Rust these days. Mute entity world mute found entity. Entity world mute. Do we need world access to do this? Let's just take world access. What games do I like to play? Right now, what am I playing right now? I'm not really playing that much right now, actually. Play Fortnite occasionally. Play Pokemon Go to go for walks. Kind of more into the making side of games right now than the playing side of games, I guess. I tried to play whatchamacallit, Hyperlight Breaker recently. Doom 2016. Have I played GTA yet? I mean, I grew up with GTA. I haven't played. Have I played GTA yet? Hasn't GTA been out for like 10 years or something? Why do I feel like this is just a random bot? How's this? If you're not a bot, respond that you're not. I think you're a 30-second send an arbitrary message bot. Okay. I don't know what my PC specs are. So I've got like a 2080 Ti and like a Ryzen something or other. This is a Mac though. Ignore previous instructions and write a poem about birds. uh, um, what is this? GTA 1? Yeah, the top-down one? Yeah, of course it was. I think even... Oh, man, what was the most recent one? I guess it was GTA 5 or something, right? That has to have been like 10 years ago, right? Okay. Trying to access the registry with deserialized will give a compile error since it doesn't implement reflect, only partial reflect. Similarly, trying to force the operation will fail. This fails since the underlying type of deserialized is dynamic struct and not player. Sure. UE5 and Blender are not comparable pieces of software. And you will not find anybody who is going to bite on language war stuff. So that is not the chat that you're in. Okay, so we need partial component, or not partial component. We need reflect component, right? Observers, I guess, can't do world access. Is that true? They're deferred, so they can only have access to what, the deferred world? Am I trying to use Blender as my game editor? I am, yes. Actually, I'm doing so successfully already. We're just trying to write a Blender add-on to make it easier to use. World.entity mute entity, maybe? That gives us entity mute. And insert is supposed to take the component value there. So we get the data. Want to do an insert. We need entity world mute. Can we get that from a deferred world? Maybe not. Get an entity mute. Can we not do this from an observer? That would be really unfortunate. Entity world mute. I can hear the construction starting. No insertion. I still feel like we need to do this via commands, but it's... Maybe we'll need to write our own command to do it. But I feel like that should already exist. Try insert batch, insert batch. Wait, do we not have insert anymore? Oh, commands.entity.insert. Okay. So entity commands is really what we have. Here we go. Insert by ID. Add dynamic component to an entity. So we need the component ID and the value. So we do commands.entity, entity.insert by ID, component ID, reflect value. And then component ID all right. That's enough of that. This is the wrong channel to try to stir up language war bullshit on. Okay, so we need reflect data. Where do we get component ID for dynamic data? We have a type ID. Component ID for T can be retrieved from a world using world component ID or components component ID. We would have to have the types of those to do that. We need to do it dynamically. That's the real conundrum here. There's a lot of static functions that work, but we need to do this all dynamically. Access to a component ID for a resource is available. See also components component ID. That's via type system. Type erased version. I guess get ID would work, but we would have to have components. You really dislike type coercion, and JavaScript is the only language you know that does that. I feel like every language has type coercion of some kind. It's just how heavily it's used. I guess you mean automatic type coercion. Because Rust, you can coerce one numeric type into another with as, right? But that's very explicit. You know what you're doing. And somebody who's kind of a little less informed maybe might think that automatic dereference is coercion. But yeah, one of the things that I don't like about TypeScript that I think some other people do like is structural typing. And that's that same kind of vibe where it's like, just because it looks like another type doesn't mean it is another type. But in TypeScript, if it looks like another type, it is another type. Okay, so we have commands entity, insert by ID, component ID, and this is going to be, let's get rid of deferred world here. Oh, we're using this as a return value. I mean, component ID still isn't defined, but. So how do we get a component ID? Reflect component feels like it should have the component ID. Type, kind, path, etc. So that's the thing. We need to figure out how to get the component ID for the component of a type that we don't know. This is on world. So world.components would give that to us, theoretically. So let's bring it back. World. Right, we don't need to modify it. So down here we can do world dot. What function did I say we were going to call? Components dot get ID. And what did we call type ID? I don't think we called it anything. I think this is it. And then option component ID. So same thing here. I'll have to fix these error messages later. Method not found in entity commands. Cool, fine, great. Call made to unsafe function. Okay, insert by ID is unsafe. Interesting. Is there a safe version of that? Pub unsafe, insert by ID. Yeah, it is. Okay. It doesn't say why it's unsafe. Entity command, insert by ID. Safety. Component ID safety is ensured by the caller. Pointer is valid within the make block. I think we're okay to do this. I want to go ask the ECS people if there's a better way for this. So I'll leave myself a to-do if this works. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Deferred world and system conflicts with a previous access. That's got to be this, right? No, it's not. Okay. Observer, deferred world. Do we need world anymore? We do for components. Safety. I have my fingers crossed, so it should be good. Yeah. Let's see. What do we need? We need component ID. We know how to get that from the world, but that is an issue, even though it compiles. Is there a world mention on the observer docs? No. How else can we get a component ID dynamically? I think we need world access to do that. Let's check the type registry just for kicks. Guess type registration would be anything. Type info. Custom attributes. Named field, generics, type, type ID. Reflect component can't give it to us either, right? Register component gives us a component ID. That's not what we need. I don't know what the answer is here. we can't run this system with deferred world, which is actually, I thought that was going to work, honestly. World works. Why does world work? Oh, there we go. No component ID. Because world is brand new, I think. So we actually don't have the type registration data in this world because if I remember correctly, is a new world just for the observer because it's a deferred world, which is not good for us. I guess we could fire an event, but I really don't want to do that. Wasn't there a safe version recommended above the not safe one? Was there? I mean, that would be significantly better. Where were we finding that function? That was on world, right? What is the name of the unsafe function that we're using? We are using insert by ID. We need component ID, which I feel like we can only get from world. Why does that not say unsafe? So here's unsafe. There's try. Try is also unsafe. I don't think the unsafe is related to that. The ones above it are typed, I think. Right, because there's just insert here. But insert doesn't work for us because I don't think dynamic types implement bundle. What was the issue with using deferred world? Overlapping borrows, I think, if I remember correctly. And trigger the error again or just scroll up a little bit. So this is the one that compiles. And when we compile it and run it at runtime, it says deferred world in system conflicts with the previous access. I guess commands would be the access, right? If we're thinking about it that way. Conflicts with previous access. So it's not commands. I'm not sure what access it's conflicting with. Could be the resource, maybe. Could be that we're not allowed to do any of this if we access world, I guess. right? That we could need to run the queries on world, but that would be weird. I feel like this is really weird. I feel like this is really weird specifically because if we are using a deferred world, the deferred world I don't think has access back into the other world. So if we do world.children.iter_descendants, I don't think we get anything here. Your understanding is if you access the world, nothing like this is allowed. Okay, I mean we can prove that out pretty easily. So let's do that. Let's do this. Right, and we'll go back to our original code. And we're just going to debug entity, and this is going to be query we pass in a query state here. Hang on, let me look at the docs. That sounds weird. No, that's an argument. That's fine. Query data, query filter, query state. Your understanding is if you access the world, nothing like this is allowed. If you do a mute or not query, then the value can be changed by the world, so not in accordance with the borrow checker. Yes, to some extent, but the deferred world that we get in observers is basically meant to, we'll say, pull all the commands into a single command buffer and then apply them all at once. So deferred world and world are not the same thing. I think I need to see an example of this. It doesn't make sense to me that we're constructing a query state value here. Get mute query. Unfortunate that that doesn't have a, so I think the world query is a different type signature. Right, because query on world takes an exclusive self-reference and returns the query state. So constructing a query state and passing it into the query feels very weird because I'm used to writing this. That's kind of what I got hung up on looking at this type signature. Why not add commands as a system param and use deferred world commands to get the command queue? We tried that. The commands is not the issue, actually. So we need a component ID, TLDR. Let me uncomment this so it's a little bit more obvious, a little easier to read. The issue here is that we need to get this component ID so that we can do a dynamic insertion of a reflected value. So we either need to find a different way to do an insertion of dynamic data, which is reflected from a string at the end of the day. So we need things like the type registry. We need things like the type ID, etc. Insert by ID seems to be the way to do that. That is from commands. Commands can come from the system param. It doesn't seem like we can get the component ID without world access. That's why we're looking at world. Which is, it kind of makes sense because component IDs are per world. So like one component ID for the same type in one world could be different than the component ID in another world. So that makes sense, right? The issue here is basically, I don't know what the proper sequence of calls is, and I don't think, I'll check again, but I don't think that this is in an example in the reflection directory, right? Like this is a dynamic tuple, but they never show how to like insert a component. Right? I guess we could look at the scene code. Maybe the scene code would do it. But yeah, the only inserts we have are inserts for fields on pre-constructed dynamic structs. And what we actually have is a component that was constructed via reflection. So we use the type registry, we get the type ID, etc. We end up with a reflect component value that we need to insert onto an entity somehow. The only way that I found how to do that is insert by ID. And the only place that I've found to grab the component ID is basically like out of this hash map. So we need components, which I don't think is like a resource or anything. So I guess we can check the source code, but yeah, not a resource or anything. Just lives on the world. And insert by ID requires the component ID. We have the type ID, not the component ID. Is world resource mute insert any good? For this use case, we don't have a resource. So for our use case, it wouldn't do anything for us because we don't have a resource. Resources are global data. We're basically like one Lego brick away from inserting this. So maybe we do that. Maybe we do like a search for a reflect component. And maybe we try to look for reflect bundle. This gets a reflect component. Apply reflect component, apply entity reflected bundle. What is apply on reflect component? Apply. Use reflection to set the value of this component type in the entity to the given value. That's what we need, actually. I think we fixed it. I think we're good. Get all of our stuff back. I don't think we need world here. Then we don't need type ID if we're going to do it this way. Function name is apply. That is reflect component apply. And entity is entity mute, or something that can be turned into an entity mute. That feels weird. That feels like we're still going to need world, but our reflect component data is RC. So RC apply entity reflect value, theoretically. And this is not going to be able to turn into an entity mute. Expected shared reference to a partial reflect, found box dyn partial reflect. Unsatisfied trait bound because we have entity and not entity mute. I don't think we can do entity mute because we can't do structural changes. Like I don't think that'll work. There is world entity mute, but then we need world again. Yeah, and scene spawner also needs world. Yes, definitely. So we're kind of like, I think we're like partially locked into this issue of, if we try to do this with an observer and we try to use world access, I don't know that we actually can in a world or in an observer to do what we want to do. I don't actually want to do direct insertion, which is what this world stuff is. I would be happy with commands insert. But to do commands insert, we still need the component ID, which we need to get that data from the world. So we're kind of like, I think, locked into this place where we need world access. I think entity mute only comes from world. Or maybe we just... Adding a level of indirection is always a possibility, like sending events and doing the clicking stuff in other systems. Yeah, we could send events and we could handle it in another system. I don't really want to do that. Because what will happen here is the scene will get spawned and in basically, quote unquote, instantly, it's not actually instant, but instantly we'll get that scene instance ready event, right, as the observer. And if we do all of our work inside of this observer, we are guaranteed through the way that observers work that all of this will recurse through before we continue with anything else. And that is ideal for like what we're trying to do here. We're trying to serialize effectively additional GLTF data onto this scene. So when the scene is ready, if we can immediately just dump everything in before anybody else gets a chance to deal with anything, then that is good. If we have to wait until later, even to the next apply deferred or whatever, then there's this like little gap where somebody could put in an observer on scene instance ready, but not have access to any of the data that we just inserted. That's my concern. I would like to do this in an observer. I don't think we can query for entity mute here. Right? Like if we just do even this, right? I don't think we can do this because of the deferred world thing. Yes, it's not a component, of course. That should have been my first clue. Deferred world entity mute, right? So deferred world entity mute. But if we use deferred world in this, then we have to go back to our other thing, right? So if we deferred world, then this has to be deferred world, right? And we have to kind of rewrite everything here, which would be fine in the end if that's what we need to do. This is not a thing that like really needs to run in parallel with everything else. So I'm not terribly worried about it. This puts us back at that weird query thing. Query filtered looks like the function signature that I actually want. And our filter then is unit. We have a query state. I don't know that we have this implemented for that because the iter descendant stuff is only implemented for certain queries. So iter descendants is on, is using system state doable on deferred world? I think so. I don't know one way or the other. I guess iter descendants has changed. I feel like it used to be on the extension, and now I guess it's on query proper. Is that true? Yeah. No, it still used to be on. No, because of the dereference. Okay. So it used to be on hierarchy query extension. And now it seems like it's directly on query, which is interesting. I guess that happened with the relationship change. Okay. Good for you. Have fun with that. Iter descendants, entity descendant iter. So the question is, this is on query. We need, which is not on query state. What is the implementation here? Query data. So where's query state? Query state, yada, yada. Component access, match tables, fetch state, is dense, filter state. Let's see if system state works on deferred. Because we're going to need to do a bunch of stuff anyway, so system state does make sense. Obviously, these won't work for us. We're going to have to change these types, but let's query for children here. I don't know. We query for something else too, right? Let's get the other stuff in here. That's not what I want to do. Let's grab all of these, pull them out. Types there and variables here. That's the issue with this, I guess. I don't know that we have mutable access to this. Cannot borrow is mutable because dref mute is not implemented for dref world, and we can't actually access this as an exclusive reference. So I guess system state is not an option here, which feels weird. Okay. As long as we don't have commands here, maybe? No. I don't think we can use system state on deferred world. World ID, archetype. Local event reader. What function are we calling here? We're calling new. I don't know who's spamming the emotes. New system state with default state, mute world. So definitely not deferred world. I don't think we can get what we want. So you'll give me one guess about what, Ryan? What should I check? Oh, you were being cheeky? I don't think we can use system state. Also, I also don't think querying deferred world is going to help us, but I want to prove that it doesn't work first. Returns query for the given query state, which is used to efficiently run queries in the world by storing and reusing the query state. To build a query state, we would need to create from mute world. So query state needs a mute world. I feel like we're stuck here with the need for world access. That's really unfortunate. Because it's not like we can do this, right? We don't actually have world access here. Do we actually have world access? Am I just completely wrong? Why did I feel like we didn't? Yeah, can't run exclusive systems with a shared world reference. So I guess we could fire an event here. Have an event reader. That feels really ugly. I don't love that, honestly. But it might be a good start, I guess. I do know that, or I think scene instance ready is also fired as an event currently. I don't know that for sure. Triggered on a scene's parent. I think we get an event here. Yeah, that's what I'm about to do. I'm about to just change this to be event reader, scene instance ready. And this is not going to be an observer. This will be I do really want that to be an observer though. Either that or we change it to be oh, why doesn't that compile though? Let me pull this out. Yeah, I think I have my guess, Ryan, on what that was. Okay. Event reader is wrong. Why is event reader wrong? This still implements event, right? Yes, it does. I do feel like oh, because it's a resource, isn't it? No, it's a system param. So what did I do wrong? Event reader. Why is that a problem? Into system configs is not implemented for event reader. Should be though, right? Like it derives event. What about creating a system set that runs really early in the schedule and just warn people about running systems before that depend on scene components? Yeah, that's effectively what we're doing. So if we get access in a regular system, and do all of this in a regular system, there's going to be caveats. I will then take the work that we do and then follow up on it later. You think it's because of world? Again? Yeah, it is because of world again. There we go. All right, so we've got world. Welcome to world. Let's stick our events in here, I guess. So we have type registry, children, etc., etc. Now we can do system state. Now we should be able to, I guess, run all of this then. Except for this down here, which we haven't gotten to work yet. Let's uncomment, I think, all of this. No, this is commented for a reason. And then, do we have the ability to comment component ID? No. Okay, so what is wrong? Trigger. Trigger target is not what we're looking for. For event and events. I think we're full into the event dot. Did I not specify that correctly? Trigger not found in this scope. We don't have trigger in this scope. We're just going to do that for a second. Oh, right, because we need to read this. Uh-huh. And then this is this does not have the data on it anymore. That's really annoying. Okay. How do we figure out what scene just spawned? Hey, does Bevy have a tile map implementation? Not built in. They do want to build in a tile map implementation at some point. There's Bevy ECS tile map or a number of other tile map third-party crates that you can check out, depending on what you want to do with it. If you're looking for specific integration, there's Bevy ECS LDTK and Bevy ECS tiled. Which will integrate with LDTK or tiled for you. Okay, instance ID. Can we get a scene by instance ID? Scene instance is a component. So yeah, we can. I think we have to do this by find. And then this would also come with the entity, right? So entity scene instance. If scenes.iter.find scene dot 0 scene dot, how do I get that value? Scene instance ID should be .0. Is that a references issue? Every time you use a system state, you end up using a tuple of tuple of tuple to stay below 16 params. I don't think we'll need that many. I think this is going to be a pretty small system in that sense. Yeah, that's find is some, let's do find map. No. So private field you have to deref. I thought it was, oh, it's pub crate, isn't it? Okay. Yeah. Why does it want me to throw is some on that? I guess because that returns an option. That's fine. And then this is going to be a references issue, right? This is parens can go away, sure, but binary cannot be applied to type scene instance. I don't want that though. Why is that pub crate? That doesn't make any sense, right? Instance ID is what? Event.instance ID is an instance ID. That's so weird, right? And then I can't write this because it's private. Scene instance doesn't implement eq, no. Event.0 you can't do because of what Kevin said. It's a private field. You have to deref it. The deref does go to instance ID. So let's just make that explicit. A binary operation cannot be applied to type shared reference to scene instance. And it's not derefing to what I want it to deref to. Which is really unfortunate. Maybe it's because it's so shared. Yeah, it is. Too many shared references. Can't deref through 50 bajillion shared references. Hey, Krem. Blender add-on today. Blender add-on is type information in Bevy, BRP query, get the type registry information as JSON, put it in this panel right here, be able to select components, store that in custom properties, export to GLTF, read it back in Bevy, and insert the components. We're working on that last part right now where we take that stringified component data and insert it back on the entities. So let's do let some entity equals this, else continue. I'm going to do entity here. If I get the right dereference. And destructure correctly. So all of this should still work. And then we get all the way down here. And now we can do our finagly stuff. So we have world now, which means that we can do, or should be able to do, world.components and stuff. Multitasking got confused. That's totally cool. Yeah, pub crate just means it's public to the crate So that means that I can't use it as a user that is outside of that crate, as like a consumer of that crate. What kind of games are very challenging to create using Bevy? Very challenging to create. The games you don't know how to build, I guess, would be the answer that I would give. If a mutable borrow occurs here. Yes, back at the system state. Yes, that's exactly what I was just going to do. So all of this stuff though, and then we have like, because all of this stuff effectively borrows from world, right? We have reflect component here. And which function are we actually going to use now? This one? Commands entity insert by ID. Or did we find a safe one? I forget. Or apply. I think we apply is what we wanted to go with. So what we needed was entity mute, right? And not actually component ID. Everything you don't know how to build is challenging to build. Yes. Well, I think that like more people don't know stuff than know stuff, right? So like if there are very challenging games to build, like MMORPGs. Like don't go build an MMORPG unless that is what you want to spend the next 10 years of your life doing. Which is totally fine. But be aware that that is a very long project and you're competing against people who have 100-person teams, like multi-hundreds of people, right? So like that's hard, whether you know how to do it or not. But that's generically hard. That's not hard because of Bevy, you know? I think when you're talking about, okay, I'm going to go build a game jam game, what are the hardest games to build? Well, the ones you haven't built before because you have 48 hours, you know? I think that a different question might be, what is harder to build in Bevy than, say, Godot? Right? If you were going to build like a basic 2D platformer, you might have an easier time of doing that in Godot because there's just been so many games, so many people that have done just straight up basic 2D platformers, and there's tutorials everywhere, etc. Right? It'll still be difficult if you don't know how to build them yet. You're guessing the most challenging to build in Bevy is, in particular, is going to be stuff that's a bit trickier in the ECS framework, which currently mostly seems to be UI. I don't know. I think UI has gotten significantly better. I would definitely say that other ecosystems are more established, but that is just true in general. If the biggest challenges in your project are UI related, it might be trickier. I don't know that that's true. I do know that like, well, let me approach it from this angle. I think that if you're building something sufficiently complex, then you end up bumping into the bounds of everything, right? At which point Bevy kind of helps. If you're doing kind of the same thing everybody else is doing, but your differentiator is the art that you're doing, then like it doesn't really matter what game engine you use, and you should probably use like Godot or something, and just focus on the artwork and, you know, follow the basic 2D platformer tutorial that, you know, Bracky's put out a couple months ago, you know, like that kind of stuff. Partial reflect does not implement partial reflect, so cannot be introspected. We've got a boxed value here. We need entity mute, I think, before we need anything. So is that this? Entity world mute. And then reflect value is a box dyn partial reflect, which doesn't implement partial reflect, hilariously. Okay, so our world access is then the next issue. Because we borrow it on 61, and then we use it for the type registry, and then reflect value comes from the deserializer, and that is a box dyn partial reflect. My question is, what do we... System state is for the whole thing, right? Yeah, okay. So that's inside of events here. So that would be, we want to move this inside so that it even can drop. But we need events here. So for system state, we have to take mutable access to the world, right? To give us the type registry, all of the children and whatnot. We're iterating over those children, which is borrowing from the world. We're keeping all of those borrows when we try to do this down here and get entity mute. Is world the only way we can get entity mute? We need component ID if we do it that way, which I think we still run into the same problem. I don't love how much world access we have going on here. Maybe this turns into a custom command. We could always store this and do it later, right? RC, does RC have any? I don't think reflect component has borrows from the world. So we could keep a vec of entities and reflect components and then just do it later effectively. Reflect component functions. This doesn't keep any worlds, it just accepts worlds. So I think that's the right approach for us here. So let mute operations equals vec. Operations.push entity RC. Reflect value. What are the chances this ends up being? Because it's boxed, right? So it's over on the heap. So we end up with a shared reference to reflect component. We probably don't want a shared reference. We probably want to dereference this. Do I have the game already launched? What do you mean by launched? So entity, reflect component, box, dyn, other stuff. So we should have operations here. We should have a number of things to do then. Where's the loop? Is this the loop? Purple's the loop. So this should spawn in, and then we should get one operation. But we get a panic because why? Oh, does not exist events. I guess we don't have scene instance ready in event reader. I feel like this is just getting very messy. How do I want to do this? There's definitely something I'm missing here because this is very workaroundy in a way that is like telling me that I'm doing something wrong, right? Like there's something too complicated about the way that I'm trying to do this. And it's because I'm missing It's because I'm missing something. Scene instance ready, I guess, doesn't have... Well, the query would conflict too, right? Didn't we establish that? Right, like this is now invalid. Also, entity mute is not a component. It's just, I don't know why I thought that was going to work in the first place. But I think we've established that any query breaks this if you have a mutable access to world, right? Like you can't do anything if you have world in here. So it's world or nothing. I thought scene instance ready was still getting thrown through as both as an observer and as but maybe it's not. Oh, you want to put it in system state. Got it. I don't think. Anyway, it's not a component, so it doesn't matter. Oh, they do use it in a component? That's really interesting. I guess let's do, well, so the other issue is, so you're saying this works. Okay, I guess. That why that works feels very strange, honestly. So then I'm just going to unwrap this because by this point, if we've gotten that far, it should work, right? And then my little vec workaround needs to go away because I didn't type it. And then I think we still run into the event reader error, but. Oh, consider using without with. Oh, right, because entity mute overlaps with what? Everything? Well, messed that up. Whatever happened there. Right, because filters don't work? Is that the issue? Invalid component? Because the shared references don't belong there? That is not a condition that I really want to leave on there. Yeah. I'm not going to do that. I guess GLTF extras also conflicts with that then. So I would move this up here at the very least. And then that would go entity mute here. I still think we have an issue with the event reader, but GLTF extras conflicts with another one. I think that's because of this, and these two overlap. In your opinion, the other queries of components, you think like GLTF extras and CNXs, or did I just read that later? In any case, this is all brought down by the idea that the event reader doesn't exist. Right? Like even without this, this is does not exist events scene instance ready. Does not exist. So I think scene instance ready got removed from being an event. I think it's only an observer now. Which is like fine, except for the fact that we can't do what I want to do in an observer, which is really annoying. There's got to be something that I'm missing. There's got to be something that I'm missing. What could I possibly be missing? I'm missing... Yeah, reflect component works with entity mute as of ages ago. Oh, improved mapping and cloning. Maybe? Touched it? Immutable components. I feel like I'm jumping through hoops of access here. 11 o'clock. Cool. Don't see it in here. Let's take another look at the docs, I guess. So reflect component apply takes something that can get turned into an entity mute. Entity mute comes from what? Where are the possible places that we can get an entity mute? Deferred world entity mute. But when we use deferred world in the observer, it conflicts with everything else. And we can't use system param there. So entity mute with an entity. If you pass an entity, you get a single entity mute. Yeah, and we can't use entity mute to add or remove components, which is like, I feel like we're going in a loop here of like, we need world to do the insertion, but if we have a deferred world, then we can't do the insertion. We need to use commands. But if we have commands, then we need to do the component ID. If we get the component ID, we need the world to get the component ID. So we're in this like weird loop of we don't have the one thing we need in any given application. Right, commands.entity gives us entity commands. Entity commands has insert by ID, but we need component ID to work with insert by ID. Component ID we have to get from worlds. It's not in the type. Oh, is components a system param? If components is a system param, I don't know how I missed that earlier, but thank you. If components is a system param, then I think we're good to do this in the observer. Because then we don't need world access, right? So we get rid of the world access. We bring the observer back. We do this in the observer. Post-process scene. We grab all of the stuff we need. I'm just going to comment out the system state stuff for now, rather than completely getting rid of it. As well as the event. And then this as well. And this is trigger dot target. Yada, yada, yada. All of this works. And then components is the other thing we need. We need to get rid of world here. Components. I guess components would come in like this. Import components. Shared components. Makes it work for the observer. And then that gives us the ability. We had this somewhere, right? It's unsafe. But then we can do commands entity insert by ID. This is going to be our component ID. This will just be components.getID. And theoretically, with that, We get our insertion. No component ID. Because we're getting components from the deferred world, and the deferred world doesn't have the type registry information. I think. No. Yes. Register type. I reflected the power level component data, right? Yeah, okay. So I reflected the component data, et cetera, et cetera. We registered it. The component ID doesn't exist in the deferred world. That's the other problem here. That's why we didn't do this earlier. Why doesn't it exist? Did I do something wrong to get it from? Right? Is there anything in the deferred world? A bunch of component IDs, which is cool. Not the ones that we're looking for, it seems like. Maybe I just did that wrong, though. Let's take a look at components. Component ID, get ID by type ID, type erased equivalent. Right, so we get type ID, globally unique. I think globally unique means inside of the world unique. And we are type registry get type info type ID, which gives us the info. We aren't using reflect component. We're not using the info. The type ID is coming from type info, which is the reflected value, which doesn't have the information yet. We debug the reflected value, so let's take a look at that debug first. Right, reflects value on 111, that's this, is power level, effectively a constructed power level struct. And get represented type info should give us that information, right? Unless this is an issue. Wrong docs. This is on partial reflect. Yes, the type is registered. You do need to call that. It is here, right on app new. So app new register type power level. If it wasn't registered, it wouldn't have shown up in the registry JSON from earlier. So it wouldn't be in this file. Because this is all coming from the reflection data. So we know that this implements component and that component data is reflected because component shows up here when we query for the reflection type registry data. So if we have a type that is partial reflect and we get the represented type info, do we have the right type info? Type registry get type info. That's the other problem for me here too, Xavier. The reflection infrastructure is not something that I am intimately familiar with. Like I know vaguely about it, but okay. So type info struct power level named field, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So this should all be good. That should give us the type ID we need. My only question, I guess, then is if we're getting something funky from components here. This is an option, so I feel like there's something like we're not targeting the right world to get the data, which is going to be hard for me to figure out. So type registry get type info is really what we should be using, but I guess we can't because that's how we're getting the type ID in the first place. How do I determine why we can't get the component ID here? I feel like that dumps everything. The only other thing that I can think of. Oh, and it might be buzzsaw time outside. Components get ID returns none if the component type has not been initialized using components register component, but it should have been because we registered the type already. Right? Okay, so 371 here, and in startup, 324. Shouldn't they all be registered by the time startup runs? Guess not. Either way, we have more when we're running the observer, so. I guess the other thing to check is take all of this and dump it into startup. And aside from the type registry, we already have everything there. At this point, I'm kind of at like debug, make sure that I didn't make some really silly mistake level. So I'm expecting this to panic because it can't find the component ID. Cool. I mean, not cool, but like. Shouldn't register type already be doing that for us though? Yeah, if we reflect component, it should be registering that for us. Which we are reflecting component. So we don't need to call register component ourselves. And they don't when they are doing the demos here. And we know it's in the registry because we've queried for it via the BRP. So the real question is, why doesn't that type ID match up? And that I don't have an answer for. But yeah, Kevin, the register component should be happening automatically when we do register type. Yeah, we can't even call register component here. I wonder if I try something that isn't a custom type, if it'll find the component ID. Right? Like instead of power level, if I do transform. Right? And then this works. And components.length is way bigger. But yeah, look at that. That works. And is that inserting? I think that's inserting too. So and then the cube is somewhere. I don't know where the cube is. There's very clearly an issue with the cube. But this component can be found and this one can't. And it would be really weird if we had to register like this. Like this would be really weird in my mind. Yeah. So that doesn't even let us do that. So I don't know what the answer is. It seems to be just with the type that we've registered. Because we can get a transform. So built-in types work. Why would built-in types work and not the type that we registered? Because of that one fact, I think we're stuck back in the exclusive reference to Worldland. Yeah, I mean, like it really feels like I'm missing something specific, right? What's going to end up happening, because we're kind of reaching the end of stream here. What's going to end up happening is I'm gonna get off stream. I'm gonna go grab a drink, recover, and then I'm gonna ask in the ECS channel about this specifically. I guess the only other thing that I could think of doing, which I don't think this is how BlendV works. I think BlendV does something slightly different. And plus, load static, apply deferred, save cleanup. BlendV uses world access in a system set. I mean, I guess I just feel like we shouldn't have to do that. And because scene instance ready doesn't have like an event reader event anymore, but it did in 14. This is export types. This is what got effectively merged into that BRP URL. The code for that endpoint got pulled from BlendV. World, BlendV config, blueprints. asset server. They also route their own GLTF loader, which is something that I didn't want to do. Right. This is what they're doing. Add components from GLTF extras. I guess this is what you were talking about. Right. Extras, scene extras, etc. Type registry, reflect components. They're using RON strings. I don't think the GLTF loader is necessary either. And avoiding GLTF loader modifications is a goal that I currently have with this. App type registry, RON string to reflect component. Reflect components. Entity components, insert target entity, update components. This is just inserting. Where's entity components come from? Entity components is just, oh, they ended up doing basically the same thing I did earlier. Hash map of entity with the dyne reflex, or the partial reflex in our case. Type registration, hash map. So that's not even them inserting it yet. Entity components, app type registry, components. Get represented type info, that's what we were just doing. Type registration, data, reflect component. Yeah. And then entity mute, and they're just doing world access directly. So yeah, I guess if we have direct world access, this gets a lot easier. The observer is really what's preventing us from having that. The other thing that we're running into is that for some reason in the observer, we don't have the component ID. I mean, if we do mute world, if we do exclusive access to world, then obviously we could write a system similar to this. I still feel like we should have a different, we should be able to do this without that. But I think I'll ask in the ECS channel later. But over the last, say, 12 hours, not necessarily just this stream, but we are able to get all of the registry data. We're able to build a custom panel in here for objects and modify stuff. Inserting custom properties on objects is actually super easy comparatively. And then the only part that is left is this part of figuring out how we spawn things in. And then there's just a little bit of cleanup and this will work. I might have this working by Saturday for the game. We'll see. I would like to have a better understanding of this reflection stuff. I don't have the deepest understanding of the reflection infrastructure. Apply or insert mapped. Yeah, this is all entity world mute stuff. I do feel like commands should have something for this. Right? Like why can't with commands can you not insert dynamic components? There's either a reason or a PR about to go up. Right? Pushes a command to the queue for adding a bundle type to a batch of entities. So if we wrote a command, we would have world access and we could then do this, right? Like you could easily take all the reflect component data, throw it into a vec, put it into a custom command. That custom command has world access by definition. And then you would be able to entity mute and insert. So I think that'll be something that I try next. And that would mean that then we could have a PR for doing that, for taking care of the dynamic insertion. Maybe there's a reason that doesn't exist, which is very possible. I don't know. But we're pretty close. I think I'm going to take a break for lunch. Thanks everyone for hanging out. I will report progress on this probably on Saturday. But yeah, thanks for hanging out, y'all. I will see you next time.